Oh man, game journals are seething. We have seen some of the early day one pre-release Switch 2 coverage from some prominent game journals, and they're not happy. They're doing everything they possibly can to perpetuate certain narratives. This idea that Mario Kart World's open world is empty and there's nothing to do. They're really doing this song and dance. It's like they're scrolling through Reddit, trying to find something they could hold against this game. We'll just say the same thing that people were saying 2 months ago, so that people take them seriously. It's like the brothership thing all over again, right? They release this statement, and the only people who are defending them are people who had an agenda, who wanted to downplay the game anyway. That's the reality of IGN's coverage of Mario Kart World. Nobody cares except those who want to weaponize IGN against Nintendo fans. And I suppose this is why Nintendo didn't give you guys day one units to begin with, because they knew this would happen. You guys have been pulling these stunts for 25 years. This is nothing new. The only thing that's changed is that more and more people are seeing through your nonsense, okay? I was calling you out in by 2005. 2006, when the Wii came out, and so many people were trying to tell you that the Wii, it's gonna massively underperform compared to the PS3, and what happens? The exact opposite. And the gaming journalism industry spent the entire generation, trying to rewrite reality. The Wii's more popular, but it only does well among soccer moms who don't actually buy games. Real hardcore gamers are playing Grand Theft Auto 4 on their PlayStation 3s. You would have Chad Horton sitting there in his stupid chair who wants to play that shit? It's just what the reality of the situation was so different than what the pop culture, what the narrative was, that a lot of people really never processed that Nintendo won that generation until recently, when you had people trying to say that Nintendo was more successful back then than they were with the Switch, even though that's observably not true. But people were very adamant on downplaying the Wii at the height of its popularity, and they threw all manner of weird conspiracies at it, trying to downplay this successful platform. And we saw that happen all throughout the Wii U and the Switch generations as well. But with the Switch 2 on the horizon, after situations like Mario and Luigi Brothership, gaming journalism can't. This is their last stand. Okay, this is their last chance to preserve the Kojima world order and just keep people invested in the PlayStation and Xbox ecosystems, whatever it takes. They'll give Metal Gear Solid 5 perfect scores because of its dynamic, open environment. And then turn around 10 years later and say that Mario Kart World is boring and empty. Even though that's obviously not the case, even by looking at pre-release footage. It's insane, right, seeing this happen. But what's also interesting is seeing how many people anticipated this and are clowning on IGN. I didn't read the article. I don't know who wrote it. I don't know what's happening. All I've seen are just people on Twitter just pointing out the obvious, IGN is upset that Nintendo took steps to prevent them from doing the pre-release damage control they typically do. Okay, they did it for the Wii, they did it for the Wii U, especially for the Wii U, and they did it for the Switch. People weren't willing to admit the Switch was a phenomenal hit until well into 2019. You know what I mean? And then after Animal Crossing came out, the Switch is clearly on the way out. It was just obviously a cope and a seethe, right? And now we're seeing just the same situation play out just with the Switch 2. So we are going to be seeing a lot of like really frustrating like narratives being pushed forward over the next couple of weeks. I imagine a lot of people are going to be complaining about the release schedule or the availability of Switches or the price. Actually, I think the price is a non-issue at this point. Like people are gonna like be throwing all sorts of weird like drag and drive. Like I saw that like internet weirdo Gaijin Goomba. Oh no, the lonely Gaijin Goomba. I don't know who this guy is. The guy who made that like Goomba Got Back video. Like that guy was like seething at like drag and drive. Like if I was Nintendo, I would have made the game look bright and colorful and give it more personality. And I'm just sitting there like, I remember when like in the 2000s everybody was coping and seething about how every Nintendo IP looked like that, and how like more Nintendo IP should just be Metroid. Like I'm old enough to remember that period. So like the fact that like people like that are like spurging out about like the aesthetic for like a sports game is just so insanely laughable. You can't even like really wrap your mind around it. It's just so insane. Dragon Drive is going to be a really interesting like target, I think, because like this is like the early summer like minor release for Switch 2. It's basically like this console's arms, and like everybody like adamantly believes this thing is going to fail and that it's not going to be relevant at all. I don't know. I think this thing, like, if it sells 1 million units, considering the scope and the budget, like, that's going to be a huge milestone for Nintendo. Like, I think people really underestimate, like, what's going to happen when Nintendo gets to the point where they can produce, like, high-quality sports titles that can do well even without the sports like endorsements, because that's the big thing that happened to FIFA and like EA like over the past couple of years, is that they're losing like licenses to like clubs and stuff like that, and so they can't maintain like the audience without like Tony Hawk like being on the cover or whatever. We saw this happen with Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5, where like Activision bought Pro Skater. For 15 years they had a contract. The games fell out of style and they just kind of forgot to produce more until they realized, oh man, we're losing our exclusive Tony Hawk contract in like 2015, and then pumped out like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5 failed, and now like the series has kind of made a resurgence because Tony Hawk and like his people are getting like the games remastered and like doing a pretty good job of it too. But like this is a really good example of what I mean, of just like how every other company is severely dropping the ball, and yet like IGN turns a blind eye on to it in order to like continue this narrative that like Nintendo bad, and it's exactly because of situations like this. IGN feels that Nintendo is a threat to their business model. Nintendo fans, not taking them seriously, not respecting them, not like acknowledging their scores as credible. That is a very real threat to IGN and like the traditional games media. This is like more, I would argue, actually this is true, it's not even like really an argument, the Nintendo hate is far more ingrained in gaming journal culture than like the woke culture. It's a way more like systematic part of their identity and like how they get clicks and like stay relevant, because anybody who's like been following these people for as long as I have knows that they do this kind of nonsense all the time. Just look at what happened last year with Mario and Luigi Brothership and Princess Peach Showtime. 2 excellent games downplayed by some Paper Mario fanboy.